Tried very hard to employ people in better where you
Yeah, he was a great friend of the Namgis peoples. His favorite saying used to be, give all the land back to the First Nations people, they can run it better than white people. So, but that's something he used to always say.
We share the island, Cormorant Island, with the Namgis First Nation, our First Nations partners and allies and friends who originally lived in the Nimkish Valley across the water from us. And they came here to use the cedar trees and to use it as a camp originally. And then when the contact with white government, I guess, the non-First Nations government, they forced basically the Namgis to move here to this island, to the reservation on the island. And Gilbert was extremely good at crossing boundaries or melting boundaries, if you will. And I guess the epitome of that, or the example of how we work in unison together, would be the Alert Bay Accord. That was an agreement between the Namgis First Nation and the village of Alert Bay to work in cooperation on things that are common to both communities. So whether it's health, hospital, roads, garbage, sewers, all of those things, we work very, very closely together, education. So a very, very tight partnership. And Gilbert and Chief Bill Cramner were the main impetus, the main push behind creating that union where we can work together towards common goals for the community.
There was a crisis in Canada, in eastern Canada, the ochre crisis, and actually one or two Indians got shot. The native Indians were shot by the police, and the local people decided to protest to that by having a protest march, and they closed down part of the road which is on the main street. But, and they expected some kind of retaliation from the village because it was on village property. But Gilbert was very, very smart. He did not retaliate. He did nothing. The road was blocked. It was blocked for a couple of weeks. But what happened was the ambulance was on the other side of the road, and there were a couple of incidents that involved the ambulance, which had to go around a big detour. So eventually the native people decided, well, we've had our protest, and they reopened the road.
I always got along well with Gilbert. As the leader of the municipality and me being the leader of the Namgis, we got along together. I can't recall any argument we had. I remember at one time when the Mohawks were having their difficulty in Quebec, we were thinking of ways to support the Mohawks, and we decided that the easiest way to support them would be to blockade the road at the graveyard. You see where the totem poles are? So we did that. I think it was the longest standing blockade in Canada. And Gilbert, of course, had a business on the other side of the blockade, and he was having trouble getting his trucks, semi-trailer trucks, to move the salmon that he was marketing. And he said, Bill, you know, can't I go through the blockade? And I said, well, not really. If we let you in, the other people will want to do the same thing. So he went and took the long way around, but he managed to get around the blockade. But even though we were affecting his business, he still supported what we were doing. So as a result, we won our argument on the graveyard. The province agreed to build a road out more towards the beach because they were building the road on top of some of the graves in the graveyard. So Gilbert's fully supported that, even though it was affecting his business.
We all coincide together. We all work together. Even growing up, when I was young, I didn't know if I was white or if I was native, because I was born into an interracial family. So I didn't know really where I belonged, but when I got older, I found out that we all belonged together. So it was beautiful. There was no animosity because I was half Italian or half Native Indian.
We didn't have much to do with the Native culture growing up. Because we were raised by our father, and back when I was younger, it wasn't in the schools like it is now, where they're teaching them the language, they're teaching them the dance. There wasn't as much potlatching. So my sisters, we weren't very cultural that way. We started learning as we got older. My mother, though she spoke Kwakwala, she refused to speak it at that time because it was taken away from them when she was a child. So it's not something she instilled in us. I moved away very young, and I was gone 15 years. And when I came back, a lot of my generation had already started learning the culture more, that hadn't learned it as children. So I'm a little bit behind. I get involved where I can. I guess I'm a bit intimidated because I don't know as much, and the dance I find hard to learn. I've danced in a big house. I've got an Indian name, but I'm very nervous in there, and because I don't feel I'm as culturally educated as a lot of people here.
In Alert Bay, for many years, we weren't allowed to practice our culture. It was outlawed by the Canadian government and the churches. They're trying to assimilate us. Yeah. So when we were allowed to revive our culture, we started to teach it in the school, our language, our dance, our songs. Because what you see today in our culture is not what I grew up with. Because I was caught in a time when they made changes in our territory here. We weren't allowed to speak our language. They hit us if you spoke our language in our school here. I was caught in that confused time where we're trying to be something you're not. And it doesn't make a person feel good. And I didn't make good choices because I didn't have good feeling here in my heart. I want people to feel proud of who they are and feel strong, because that's not what I grew up with. We were ashamed of who we were because we didn't know. We were made to feel ashamed. Even in the books in the school, nothing, movies, cowboys and Indians, they portrayed us to be such terrible people. Movies that we saw when we were children, we all wanted to be cowboys when we came out of there because we didn't want to be Indian, you know. And it wasn't until they built Umista Cultural Center when I started to know more about what happened to our people, because nobody talked about it. It was almost like it's embarrassed to talk about. And I belong to the Tsasatla cultural group. In our language, Tsasatla means to be determined. And we're determined to keep our songs and our dances alive.
My mother speaks fluent Kwakwala, and we grew up in English. So when we were growing up, it wasn't until she became a teacher where we learned how to speak Kwakwala. So all our life we knew Kwakwala, but we weren't taught it, so we couldn't converse to our granny in Kwakwala and my mom in Kwakwala. And then in school, then we started learning how to say phrases, and learning how to say mom and dad and sisters. And in our language, Kwakwala, when you explain things, there's more meaning to what you're saying. It's more expressive when you're speaking in the language. And I'm a teacher by nature. I teach culture. And if you say to a kid watla, or if you speak to a child and say huklilalas in our language, the kid responds better to Kwakwala when you're teaching them laws of our people. But the language is vital because everything about us it goes through our language. It's a thread for us. It's like everything's woven together with our Kwakwala language. Everything has more meaning and connection to the whole. Our whole universe is through the language.
We developed a writing system and then trained people to use it. Developed a series of 12 language books with tapes to go with them. They're used in schools. While I was at the cultural center, we also had classes for adults because I would say most people under the age of 50 don't speak the language at all, or didn't. Yeah. And that had to do with schools where the language was forbidden.
My mother married a white man, so she lost her status. We became white, so to speak, respectfully. We lived off reserve. We went to the public school as opposed to the residential school. I reflect, it's sad, you know, what happened, and it was even as late as 1996, the last residential school in Canada. So residential schools were put there as part of this, the government's regime toward a genocide of a people, to take the Indian out of the man, so to speak. Children as young as 3 and up were taken from their homes and put into these residential schools where they weren't allowed to speak their language, where they weren't allowed to see their siblings, were supposedly be given an education, but more often than not, it was almost like a labor camp. There was many types of abuse that happened there, you know, and this is really another story on its own, but it was traumatic. It devastated not only our people, but First Nations across Canada and down in the United States as well. Many of the students, not necessarily here, but many of them as a whole within Canada, up to 50% of the students, the children who were taken and put into these residential schools, did never return home. They died. Some of those schools, especially in the prairie and eastern provinces during the winter months, had abominable conditions they were living in, and survival was, you know, a real challenge in every respects. You know, our children who were put in there were made to feel shameful for who they were, and, you know, were just embarrassed and ashamed of who they were. So when they came to our school, I say ours, because when I was white, sort of thing, we didn't know what they went through, and they were embarrassed. You know, they didn't talk about it. So for much of it, I only hear about it from my friends who I went to school with then, in this day, have heard about the terrible things that had happened. And I've sat a number of times with friends who have gone through that, and we've, you know, in tears, finally realizing what had happened in those days. So you have all of these kids, you know, from that early age going up, you know, till their teens, who had no connection with their family, had no connection with their siblings in there, were abused, beaten, sexually, whatever, mentally, emotionally, and being away from their family unit, lost all parenting skills. And that's why you know, it persists today with many of ours. It's a vicious cycle. One of the things that we try to do, though, is move forward and acknowledge the trauma that happened and do the healing work. You know, we're a proud people, and that is coming back, and we're working hard to work in a holistic manner and you know, bring all of this to closure, and you know, we have to break that cycle.
What I do is I get my little kids, my little 4-year-olds ready for kindergarten. So we learn the ABCs, we sing, a lot of play. I really encourage play and, you know, social interaction, because they need to learn that. They need to learn how to get along with one another. I just pretty much prepare them for the outside world, pretty much prepare them for their years in school. I'm going to invite in some elders to talk about stories like with morals, some native elders, just to come in and tell some nice stories of, you know, especially the Zunaqua one. Have you heard about the Zunaqua? She's a legendary big Sasquatch, Bigfoot. A big hairy woman in our legend, and she lives in the woods, and she's really sleepy and tired, and the old people used to say to the children, you behave. If you don't behave, Zunaqua's gonna get you. And so the kids, or if you wander too far from home, the Zunaqua's gonna get you and take you away. So to this day, that legend is still used by some elders. But it's a longer story, of course, but it teaches kids about listening skills and respecting the parents and making the right choices.
I grew up with a feeling of being inferior, but not anymore. I feel very strong, and we're very welcoming people. We're very welcoming people. That was our problem. We were too bloody welcoming. We allowed everybody to move into our land. You know, we just welcomed them and helped them. Gilbert Popovich, who ended up being our mayor in Alert Bay, he found that friendliness in this community. He loved Alert Bay, and it showed in everything he did. Then he also ran for government too, in a provincial government, and I supported him. In a position I was at, I was the president of a Native Sisterhood of British Columbia, and I supported his campaign because I believed in what he believed in, like giving people opportunities and you know, and we're the only nation, we're the only tribe in Canada that has a accord with the municipal government. That accord was signed when he was Mayor. Popovich was our mayor, and our chief, Bill Cranmer.
We'll be able to negotiate with Canada on a nation-to-nation basis. And the other really important thing is we're going to be out of the Indian Act, which is an act that Canada should be ashamed of. It's an act that throughout the years I think was designed to take away our lands from us. This building here is an example, a residential school, where we've seen the written words of the leaders of the day saying that if we can get the Indian out of the child, we'll get rid of the Indian problem. So they put them in these residential schools, forbade them to speak their languages, kept them away from their families for a long time. And then, of course, this building here is a result of the potlatch prohibition that was first put in place in 1884, where our ceremonies were illegal. We couldn't perform our ceremonies. And that was in place until 1951.
I started making films back in learning about it in the early 80s. We recorded a lot of our potlatches, a lot of our elders, a lot of the history of our people here in Alert Bay. Started out here. Then I went off to media arts program in Vancouver. And then I did my first directing of my 1 hour on fishing traditions of our people in '93. And from there, it just kept growing. More stories, more history, and we were the ones to tell our own story. That was the importance. Our perspective, our community voice, our story. And Gilbert, I would say, was one of the people that built the bridges between people of many cultures. And he made people feel comfortable. And he made this community feel one community as opposed to we're here on this end and the other end is by the non-native people. Gilbert had a way about him that just shared everything together. He was a fine man, and he was a very supportive man of the events and the accord that happened between us and continues on today as a result. And yeah, feel privileged to have known him.
So I'm Haida, Qualgeeth, and half Scottish. So I've always been kind of a mutt. It's a bad way of putting it, but the way I see it is art. You know, like traditional wise, like I do traditional pieces for potlatches and stuff like that. But I don't do them all the time for just anyone either. You know, it's pretty much an honor to get asked to do that, participate, and do that part of it. But you know, like this stuff here is just it's art. You know, it's going to be on someone's house or in someone's home, and some people will get they totally get offended. You know, like for instance, these masks. Like all these masks are owned by families, right? Like they have a right to dance it. They own the song that's played to dance it. They don't have them hanging up on the wall. They keep them in a treasure chest. It's just a big box and they're all put away. They don't show them, ever, unless it's danced. That's when you see it.
The potlatch was prohibited from, I think it was 1884 to 1951. So people lost a lot in the way of knowing how to do the ceremonies, having the regalia, masks, blankets, that kind of thing. And then in 1951, the Indian Act was revised, and the whole section relating to potlatches was simply deleted. It was gone. And gradually more and more people began to potlatch openly.
The sad part of their lives were, you know, when they arrested our people for participating in a potlatch, my paternal grandparents went to jail. They were in jail for 3 months in Ocala for participating in a potlatch. The potlatch, it's our ceremonial, and it was a very important part of our lives because it encompasses every aspect of our lives. When you're born, when you get a name, when you reach puberty, when you get married, when you die, and you know. So that's what I'm doing. I have a cousin who died, and they're going to do a memorial for her. So the people that come to witness are given something. So like the family gives things away. So I'm making toques for when they do my cousins. Our people were very theatrical. They did things, and the wild man was supposed to bite somebody. Well, he didn't actually bite anybody, but they paid somebody to prick themselves so that a bit of blood will come out. Not a big wound, just enough to. And so they thought that they actually went and bit people. So, and then they couldn't understand giving things away. They had they couldn't understand people just giving their possessions away. But you know, you got it all back, you know. Yeah. I had a cousin who's my grandfather. My grandfather was one of the highest ranking chiefs. So then his son became the chief, and so he used to potlatch, and my cousin said he used to give everything away. The house would just get empty, and so he was a good fisherman. Before long, he replenished his household with everything. And she said there's one time she had a dress that she liked, and she didn't want him to give it away, so she tried to hide it, but they found it and gave her favorite dress away.
My mom's cousin, who I call Auntie, Zia, her family had a potlatch, and they give out Indian names to people in the family, and she knew that Angela and Esther and I did not have an Indian name, and we were adults. So we all received one. Mine is Quinquinquala, which means thunder woman. And so I was very privileged when I got that, and my sisters and I danced at the potlatch, and we just got a little lesson outside the big house on how to do it. So it was very, very fun and very honored to receive that.
In the old days, our people knew where they were from and who they came from. There was no need for them to hang their heads on. But now they do. But it's gradually coming back. It makes me think about when I see the Western movies and I see how they treat the native people, how they treated them. And it's like they put them on reserves, and if they were to leave the reserve, they to let the agents know that they were going. Kind of like the way they're treated in Africa, when I used to watch the African. And I know when I told my children, you know, the freest man in the world is Nelson Mandela. He's in jail, but he's not going to give up his beliefs to live the way they want him to live.